Welcome, folks, to this edition of the 700 Club. It's an exciting day. First of all, there's a deadly fungus sweeping the earth, and they're not quite sure what to do and how to cure it. But that's one of the things that you've got to consider. There's a vicious storm brewing in the middle part of the nation. Blizzard conditions, even though it's spring and it looks like it's spreading east. And Hasidic Jews in Brooklyn may well subject to fines if they don't get inoculated against measles, a measles outbreak in that part of the country. But more importantly, we go out to Israel, and our friend Bibi pulled it off, a big one. He got 4 more seats, it looks like, than he had before. His Likud party is forming a coalition, and it will be historic because, as far as I understand, there's nobody in history, even as far as David Ben-Gurion, who has been in office as long as our friend Bibi. So our congratulations to a good friend and a strong statesman in charge of that country. We congratulate the voters in Israel for that wisdom. Well, John Wagi is going to explain the winner has to build a government coalition and heal the scars from a very rough campaign.
When the voting stopped Tuesday night, Benny Gantz supporters prepared for an upset in the making. Their brand new party had a narrow lead in the polls. And in the Prime Minister's camp, it was so quiet, the media far outnumbered the Prime Minister's Likud faithful. But that had all changed by the wee hours of the morning.
Although the first exit poll showed a virtual dead heat between the pro-Bibi right and the anti-Bibi left, as the night wore on, the Prime Minister's supporters grew more hopeful that Bibi would be able to form the next government and become the longest-serving leader in Israel's history.
Even after 97% of the votes were counted Wednesday, less than a percentage point separated Likud from the Blue and White Party. Some have speculated that a unity government between Netanyahu and Gantz would help the country heal from a bitter election and respond to threats from Iran and Hamas.
The coalition, it's not clear yet because we need to see who are the parties that are in the game. So 2 days from now, we'll be smarter about the coalition. But one thing we know about, and for sure, Netanyahu is the next prime minister.
I intend to work quickly to establish a stable government. I want to make it clear, it will be a right-wing government, but I intend to be the prime minister of all Israeli citizens, right or left, Jews or non-Jews alike, all Israeli citizens.
Netanyahu has already phoned many probable partners in his latest coalition, almost certainly a government of the right. John Wagi, CBN News, Tel Aviv.
Well, our CBN Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell is joining us now from Jerusalem. Chris, what were the main factors that brought in Bibi's victory?
Well, Pat, some of the main factors. First of all, I think you have to say that the anti-Bibi campaign by the Blue and White didn't work. Just saying anybody but Bibi is not something you want to govern with. Their policies were kind of vague, and one pollster called it sort of a fantasy candidate. I think that's one thing. I don't think you can underestimate the impact of the Trump administration. Just a few days ago, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was in the White House. President Trump signed a declaration recognizing Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was here just a few weeks ago. We sat down with him about that. So I think that's one other factor. And the third factor, Pat, I think you say, is Netanyahu the politician. You could say it in a Yiddish kind of way. It was a Gewalt strategy. Oy vey, about 4 days ago, he was saying, the sky's falling. You got to go to the polls. If you don't, Blue and White's going to win. That was one thing. And one political consultant told me last night, you know, the Final Four just ended a few days ago. You want the best player to have the ball in the hands at the end of the game, and I think Netanyahu pulled out one of the biggest political games of his life last night.
Chris, what about this whole business of these, they call them settlements, but, you know, you and I have been in cities that are just thriving, wonderful, vibrant cities. They're not little settlements out in the desert. Now, what he's saying is he's going to go in and make each one of those places part of Israel. There'll be Israeli citizens. Could you expand on that a little bit for us?
Well, I think that's exactly what he's going to do, Pat. He announced just a few days, just maybe 3 or 4 days before the election, that he will say that all of the Jewish communities, including the larger, quote-unquote, settlement blocks and the smaller communities, will be under Israeli sovereignty. So in any future negotiations with the Palestinian Authority, that will basically be off the table. And I think that was one of the factors, I think, that swung some of the voters, certainly on the right, towards Netanyahu. But that's going to be one of the big things looking forward to, Pat. Now that Netanyahu is going to be able to form his government, presumably in a few weeks, to see how he follows through on that promise. It's really historic to see that he was going to be able to do that to recognize Israeli sovereignty over these Jewish communities in the biblical lands of Judea and Samaria.
Chris, as I look at it, and I've been there so many times, and you live there, there is no way that they're going to have two states. The Palestinians just aren't partners for peace. Hamas is so powerful in the Palestinian Authority, and they call for the destruction of Israel. How can they ever get together? I mean, that two-state solution, in my opinion, isn't going to work. Am I correct in that?
I think so, Pat. In fact, some people thought when Netanyahu said that there was going to be Israeli sovereignty over these Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria, also known as the West Bank, that the two-state solution was dead. I think it's been dead for a long time, Pat. When you recognize not only what Hamas says, and they say it quite openly, they want the destruction of Israel, the state of the Jewish state. But if you look at some of the comments especially in Arabic by Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority, or many other Palestinian Authority leaders, really, in many ways, they want a one-state solution, too. They really want to take over the Jewish state in many ways. And so I think that makes a two-state solution very, very unlikely.
All right. Indictments. Is there a possibility that he's going to have Parliament pass a law giving immunity to the Prime Minister?
Well, there was a possibility of that a little while ago, and I think Netanyahu actually backed away from that particular legislation. But I think that's one cloud hanging over Netanyahu right now. For months, the prosecutor has sort of been on the offensive, making accusations about what Netanyahu did in these 3 cases that he's been intended to indict. And that's a good point to make, Pat. The Attorney General said he intends to indict him on 3 separate charges, 2 for breach of trust, 1 for bribery. But now Netanyahu legally has the opportunity to go on the offensive. So he will have months, as many up to a year, perhaps of more, to defend his case right now. And we'll see what happens. But that's one of the other big things to be looking for after this election.
Well, I thought the so-called crimes that he had committed are just absurd. I mean, he got favorable publicity from one of the publications. I mean, one of the broadcast networks. I mean, this is nonsense. I mean, to indict a man on something like that is just spurious. Don't you? Again, is that just my opinion? Don't say so if you disagree with me.
No, I don't think it's just...
Go ahead.
No, I don't think it's just your opinion. I think Alan Dershowitz actually made a case just before the Attorney General came out with his decision. Alan Dershowitz says, you could indict a lot of politicians if they try to get good, favorable coverage through the media. And so I think that's, in essence, some people think that's what Netanyahu is being accused of. And it's the opinion, not all of you, Pat, but I would believe Alan Dershowitz and other legal experts.
Last question. Who's going to be out of the coalition? Who's going to be in it?
Well, right now, obviously, Likud is the big one. We have 3 religious parties. They're going to be part of that as well. And then Kelanu, which is another party, up to 65 seats, it looks like right now. President Reuven Rivlin, really the power shifts to him right now. Next week, he's going to have consultations with all of the political parties and decide who's going to be the one to form the next coalition. Right now, the numbers say, obviously, it's going to be Netanyahu looking forward. The other thing, big thing we're going to have to look forward to, Pat, is the unveiling of President Trump's peace plan, the so-called deal of the century. He said, the administration said it was going to happen after the elections. So that's one of the next big things we're going to have to look forward to.
All right. Well, thanks again for your insights. Chris Mitchell, our man in Jerusalem, who has been covering with tremendous skill. Well, in other news, the Attorney General William Barr faced a grilling over his handling of the Mueller report. John Jessup has more on that.
Thanks, Pat. The Attorney General told lawmakers he's on track to release a redacted version of the nearly 400-page Mueller report next week. He faced the House Appropriations Committee over the Justice Department budget, but the topic soon turned to his handling of the Mueller probe. Some Democrats accused him of soft-pedaling the report's conclusions in his 4-page summary and ignoring summaries written by the special counsel's team. Barr defended his decision not to release those documents.
I think any summary, regardless of who prepares it, not only runs the risk of being under-inclusive or over-inclusive, but also, would trigger a lot of discussion and analysis that really should await everything coming out at once.
Barr also said he's overseeing an investigation into whether the FBI abused its authority in getting wiretaps on Trump aides. He testifies before Senate subcommittee today. Pat, back to you.
I think that's the big story, is who at the FBI was trying to gun for Trump and destroy him before he even got elected. There's a plot going on, and all those FISA warrants that were gotten and the various wiretaps and the report that was supposed to be from a British secret source or spy. This whole thing is ridiculous, and I think it's time for an investigation, and Barr is basically saying that's going to happen. But in terms of grand jury testimony and incidental material that is gained by FBI agents, that should never be made public. I mean, everybody believes that should never be made public, and it was the chairman of one of the House committees before this whole thing came up that he himself went on the record to say we cannot publish all that stuff because it is unverified and it's defamatory. Well, it's the same thing here. They just shouldn't be done, and the Democrats demanding for it, they're not helping themselves, they're hurting themselves. John?
Pat, there's a new push for an old pro-life measure on Capitol Hill. Lawmakers are bringing back the fight to ban abortions after 5 months of pregnancy. Their argument, babies being aborted feel pain. Capitol Hill correspondent Abigail Robertson explains.
Only 7 countries currently allow elective abortions after 5 months of pregnancy, including North Korea, China, and Vietnam. The United States is part of that small group, and Senator Lindsey Graham hopes to change that through the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act.
I think most people, once they know about what we're talking about, that will gain momentum and this will become law.
The bill would restrict abortions on demand after 5 months of pregnancy because of mounting evidence proving babies in the womb feel pain at that stage.
Would ask the opponents of this bill to dispute the fact that anesthesia is provided routinely to a child who is in the 5th month of the pregnancy to protect the child from the pain that would occur to save its life through surgery.
Democrat Senator Richard Blumenthal disputes the research and tells CBN News he believes the bill is a hoax.
Well, the bill as a whole is unsupported by science. It has no foundation in fact, and it violates the Constitution.
There's so much that women aren't told.
According to a Marist poll last month, 66% of all voters want this law passed.
The tide is turning in America, and that Americans are becoming more and more pro-life.
She testified alongside abortion survivor Melissa Oden.
The extreme abortion legislation is worrisome. It's painful.
Some Democrats on the Senate Judiciary Committee who are running for president skipped the hearing.
It was really telling that they don't want to go on the record and maybe be seen as being so extreme that they would oppose this common sense law, common sense bill that the majority of Americans agree on, even pro-choice Americans.
Senator Graham says he knows getting the votes in the House and Senate will be tough right now, but he's committed to fight for this over the long haul. Reporting from Capitol Hill, Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
Thanks, Abigail. A spike in cases of measles has New York City declaring a public health emergency. Officials there are requiring children be vaccinated and will fine parents up to $1,000 if they're not. The problem is growing in other parts of the country as well. 465 cases across 19 states. In some states, unvaccinated students are being told to stay home. Well, a mysterious fungus that's hard to detect is now labeled an urgent threat by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Candida auris hits several countries around the world over the last 5 years. Recently, it's turned up in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and Illinois. It's often multi-drug resistant, according to the CDC, and is called a mystery because it's difficult to identify with standard lab tests. It's also caused outbreaks in healthcare facilities. Well, it might be spring, but Old Man Winter didn't get the memo. States from the Rockies to the Great Lakes are under a blizzard warning today. Forecasters predicting 6 to 18 inches of snow and winds up to 65 miles an hour in Colorado, a major swing going from 80-degree weather to whiteout conditions. The storm is expected to move into the northeast, turning into heavy rain, Pat, and thunderstorms.
It won't let go, does it? But those poor people in the Midwest, in Nebraska, for example, the farmers are suffering incredible flooding, and now the so-called bomb cyclone, if that isn't it, is close to it, with blizzard conditions and 50, 60 mile an hour wind and blinding snow. It means the traffic will be impassable, the roads will be impassable, the airplanes will be grounded. I mean, it's just incredible. I mean, here we are in Virginia, and it's balmy and in the 70s.
I was flying in last night from Indiana, and you don't think, okay, in mid-April you're going to have problems, you know, with the weather. We had to hover over Atlanta. The pilot came on twice, said, we're going to have to go to land in Chattanooga and refuel because there's 30 planes hovering over Atlanta because of thunderstorms. But you get these big storms and and now all this crazy weather that's happening, you know, out in the Midwest.
Of course, there are tornadoes and all kinds of things going on in the South. I mean, down in Alabama, very strong winds. I mean, it's just incredible weather we got.
The good news is we did not have to go to Chattanooga. We finally got permission to land, and I made it home last night. Praise the Lord.
Glad you're here.